Welcome back. This time we're talking about Person of Interest, Season 5, Episode 9, Sotto Voce. And in case you're wondering, Sotto Voce refers to using a low voice for emphasis, which is rather apropos since this episode features the return of the voice, the villain that debuted last season. With the show working its way to its final conclusion, the voice really was one of the last major threads that hadn't been wrapped up to this point. In fact, when he was introduced last season, I thought it was a little odd that they were trying to have this new recurring villain when we had Samaritan dominating most of the storylines. Especially since his operations involving use of technology and getting people to do things for him seemed very Samaritan-esque. So I never really understood why they introduced him. But I do appreciate the writers working to tie up these last few loose ends before we get to the finale. But the most important part of this episode is that this resulting siege on the precinct finally gets John to clue Fosco into what's actually going on. Which, if you've been watching my previous reviews, is something that I've been complaining about quite frequently over this season. And I'm glad that he didn't have to die to find out what's going on. For the most part, this is a pretty straightforward episode. Of course, we have the kind of twist reveal that the number of the week was actually the voice, which is somewhat reminiscent to the introduction of Elias back in Season 1. And I have to admit, this show really does have a good ability to call back to ploys it's previously used and fooling me again. I really didn't see the twist coming. I probably should have, but I just didn't see it. But I did want to touch on two relationships, two friendships that get some good showcasing in this episode. The first being Fosco and John. They've done a good job this season of really showing that Fosco is a quality detective. Yes, he used to be a crooked cop, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he's a good investigator and a good ally for Team Machine, and especially now that he knows about the machine. John was pretty mean to Fosco in some of the early episodes, and despite that, we got to see Fosco pretty much kind of go berserker when John was kidnapped a few episodes ago, and pretty much pulled out all the stops, put himself at risk of drawing Samaritan's attention to find them. So although Fosco was kept in the dark a lot longer than I think he probably should have, it did provide a solid emotional payoff when John brings Fosco up onto the roof to finally tell him what's going on. And I did enjoy how, at least the opening line, which is pretty much all we get to hear of John's explanation, sort of ties into the opening narration by Finch. And the other friendship here is the one between Finch and Elias. Elias has been a great character ever since his introduction. First as a villain, second as sort of an interested third party, especially after Carter was killed, and then more recently as a de facto ally, first against the Brotherhood and now against Samaritan. What's great is he's such a complex character that he can have these personal connections with someone, say, like John, about violence and doing what's necessary when it's called for, and then having a completely different connection with Finch over things like philosophy and tactics and a much more cerebral avenue. And seeing these relationships develop, once again, makes me really glad that he did not die at the end of last season like we originally thought. I do have to say this is one of those times, however, especially with the connection between Finch and Elias, that this shortened 13-episode final season really feels like it has robbed us of some really good moments between those two characters, because you can see how they bond, and like I said, on a completely different level than the way he bonds with John. And frankly, just having those two really good actors on camera at the same time interacting with each other just produces some really good television. And in this episode specifically, we have at the end, when Elias kills the voice and pretty much tells Finch that not only was he always planning on killing the voice, that Finch had to have known that that's what he was going to do. It really opens up this new element to Finch's character and a potential shift as far as what he's willing to do and to protect people close to him. And of course the other major development in this episode was Shaw finally reuniting with Teen Machine. I'm pretty sure, I'm mostly sure, I'm almost completely sure, as much as I can be with any scene involving Shaw, that this is no longer a simulation, that she's actually back. And it was really good to see them all meet back up near the bridge, near sort of calling back to the original pilot episode. Taking a step back to look at this episode, you could call it a number of the week, even though the primary point was to tie up this loose thread of the voice. That being said, it was a thread that didn't necessarily have to be tied up, specifically using an entire episode to do so. But regardless of whether we're going to miss this extra episode as we have to tie up everything with the remaining episodes that we have, I do like that they were able to tie it into Fosco finally being brought into the fold. So this is a relatively short discussion. Like I said, it's a pretty straightforward episode. Please let me know what you thought of it. As always, comment below. You can subscribe to my channel. Check out my other movie and TV reviews. And until next time, watch out for Samaritan, since we don't have to watch out for the voice anymore.